What's up folks, Mike for CMCC Builds here, and with today's build we're going to look at Yasha, the Aasimar Zealot Barbarian levels 1 through 16. If you didn't watch the intro video to this series, I'd suggest you go back and check that out if you have a chance. To quickly summarize, the goal here is to show how I would optimize these character concepts by making them as effective as possible for the table, Matt's campaign, and that character concept without losing the essence of the character. That means we may or may not change the subclass. That means we may have to change a weapon or a featured spell. And since Tasha's released mid-campaign too, I will use it. Obviously, it may have been weird to make major changes midway through the campaign to things like character race, but for our purposes, I think that's completely reasonable and adds an additional layer to this challenge. The goal is not to show you how Critical Role messed up or how they're wrong and I'm right, especially since I'm using post-Tasha's rules. The framework I'm using to build these characters could vary wildly from what was available to the cast. That said, let's have some fun. For our race, we're of course going to go with Fallen Aasimar. The big change here is that we'll use the Tasha Customize Your Origin feature to move around Yasha's ability scores. The +2 needs to move to Strength, and the +1 moves to Constitution. Having that +2 in Charisma, which was Ashley's dump stat, was such a huge waste for that character. The amount of time she was entirely ineffective in combat and how that weighed on Ashley was pretty clear at various times throughout the campaign. Functionally losing out on an entire ASI while other members of the cast are playing with variant humans who get extra feats is one of the primary reasons for that ineffectiveness and frustration. Fallen Aasimar get Dark Vision, Celestial Resistance, which provides resistance to necrotic damage and radiant damage. Healing Hands, which allows Yasha to, as an action, touch a creature and cause it to regain a number of hit points equal to her level, once per long rest. Lightbearer gives her the Light cantrip. And finally, the big ability, Necrotic Shroud, which at 3rd level uses an action, once per long rest, to force other creatures within 10 feet to succeed on a Charisma saving throw, DC 8 plus your proficiency bonus plus Charisma modifier, or become frightened of you until the end of your next turn. Given Yasha's Charisma, this is a terrible ability, which sucks because the Frightened condition is actually really great, but this ability also allows her to deal extra necrotic damage once per turn with an attack roll or spell equal to her level. That ends up being a pretty decent damage bump, 1 combat a day. For background, we'll take the same one as Ashley, Haunted one, with Survival and Investigation as solid options for what's available. For the abilities, this is where things get fun. We're finally not using the point buy system. We're using Ashley's rolled stats, which were 16, 15, 14, 12, 9, and 5. This is pretty easy to figure out, with the +2 in Strength and +1 in Con, Strength 16, bringing that to an 18, Dexterity 14, Constitution 15, bringing that to a 16, Intelligence 9, Wisdom 12, and Charisma and Abysmal 5. Why the switch from an Intelligence to Wisdom? Because Wisdom is the much more important stat in this game. Wisdom saves can make or break a build, and as we saw repeatedly with both Yasha and Grog, if you're not shored up in this area, you will get shut down in combat. Or even worse, controlled by an enemy and turned against your party. You will actively hinder your team by choosing Intelligence over Wisdom for this type of build. This simple switch, changing your modifier from -1 to +1, increasing those save chances by 10%, has really no impact on the character concept, and certainly none on Ashley's ability to roleplay Yasha. And it would have made it decently more likely that Yasha could make some of those tough Wisdom saves that hindered her in a variety of combat situations. For her class, obviously Barbarian is the choice here. 3 levels in Barbarian right away gives us a few choices. We'll take the same proficiencies, Perception and Athletics, both are very strong choices. Perception is the most important skill in the game, and now with a 1 plus proficiency bonus modifier to rolls, this becomes a very solid skill for Yasha. Athletics, being a strength-based skill, is a good pickup, but it also allows Yasha to grapple and shove, 2 tactics I don't think Ashley has ever used and certainly not ever focused on, but would provide massive benefits to the rest of the Mighty Nine. Shoving an enemy to the ground with an attack would provide advantage to any of the melee attacks against the enemy. It causes movement issues as they need to use half movement to stand and gives the enemy disadvantage on their attack rolls. With extra attack, this becomes a very strong option for high athletics characters. The same goes for grappling, which can be absolutely devastating as it reduces enemy speed to 0 and allows the grappler, Yasha, to move the enemy into allies' Spirit Guardians or Wall of Fire and hold them there until they're dead. Melee builds don't have to be boring, I hit stuff with a stick characters. Lots of fun options for them. Unarmored Defense provides an AC of 15 now instead of Yasha's starting 14 because of the increase to Constitution. Because I'm going with a 14 dexterity rather than a 15, eventually wearing half plate makes a lot more sense and doesn't carry with it the wasted point of dexterity. For starting equipment, barbarians don't get armor, so we'll roll with the unarmored defense, but instead of a greatsword, take a maul. Yasha is just as cool with a massive hammer as a giant sword, and bludgeoning damage is slightly better than slashing, and gives us the option to grab the crusher feat down the road if we want to go that route. At level 3, with Primal Knowledge, Yasha gets another skill, and here Intimidation is a good grab. Ashley likes to use this skill, and Matt occasionally lets her use Strength for this skill, but either way, having Proficiency is going to help, even if the horrible Charisma score only makes it a passable skill. The Primal Path will continue to be Zealot. It's a strong barbarian subclass and was an important part of the character concept. Divine Fury provides a damage bump of 1d6 plus half your barbarian levels in damage of either necrotic or radiant. Radiant is the superior choice here. Far fewer creatures have immunity and resistance to radiant than necrotic. At level 4 we get an ASIR feat, and here Ashley took Sentinel, which is a very solid choice, but it's not the optimal choice, especially since Bo took the same feat. Here, Great Weapon Master works a lot better for the build. The -5 to attack rolls is offset by the advantage gained through Reckless Attack. Now, Reckless Attack can often be spammed, especially when raging, but it doesn't come without a very real cost. With only a 15 AC, giving advantage to enemies can and will be extremely dangerous at times. Use this ability and Great Weapon Master's -5 plus 10 ability judiciously. Don't forget that criticals and reducing enemies to 0 gives a bonus action attack, which should happen often with Reckless and Extra Attack. Ashley went straight Barbarian, which may make sense if the campaign is going to 20, and you really want to lean into the Zealot features, especially at 14. But we're not going to 20, so we'll take a quick detour into Fighter for just one level. At level 10, Ashley gets a breastplate, so she has no compunctions about wearing armor. So at this point, mundane half-plate is well within reason. Because of that, I'll take the defense fighting style rather than mediocre great weapon fighting style. That brings Yasha's AC to 18 already. In campaign, Yasha had a 14 AC at level 7. That is not good. 18 is perfectly acceptable for a tier 2 barbarian. Matt had also given Ashley a Ring of Protection at level 8, so Yasha's AC bumped up to 15, and ours would bump up to 19. The defense fighting style is also a static effect. It's not something that the player needs to remember to do, like re-rolling great weapon fighting style dice, so in addition to making the character significantly more tanky by leaning into the armor and buffing AC, this also simplifies the playstyle for the character, something important to someone like Ashley, who isn't always the best at remembering what her character does. Sorry Ashley, you're awesome. You may be saying, what about Skin Gorger and Magician's Judge? Those were great swords. Well, fair enough, but I think it's pretty clear that Matt provides weapons to the party that they can often use. And if he kept them as greatswords, Yasha can still use them just as well as a Maul. But for now, we'll assume Yasha is using a Maul. Jumping right back into Barbarian to level 9 to get the ASI feat at 8. Here you should bump Strength to get that to 20. Ashley took Savage Attacker at level 8. And that is just a straight bad choice for a variety of reasons. First, it complicated the game for her, to the point that it was often forgotten, or just added to the stress of the situation. That's not an optimization reason, but it's a playability reason that should be considered. If you forget to use your abilities, then those abilities are effectively useless. The bigger reason is simply that the effectiveness of this feat is fairly small. For a 2d6 weapon, it would bring the average up from 7 to 8.36. It's a damage bump, but a small one. Increasing your strength gives a flat +1 bonus to damage rolls for both attacks and provides a 5% greater chance to land both attacks. That ends up being an increase of 2.25 or slightly higher with advantage. Sticking with Barbarian through level 12, Yasha gets another skill proficiency at level 10. Animal Handling makes sense given all the riding of polymorph allies they did in Campaign 2. At Barbarian 12, with the additional feat, go with Resilient Wisdom. Yes, this makes our Wisdom score an odd number, but it also shores up a huge weakness in the character. If you're not fighting enemies, you're useless to your party, and if you're actively attacking your party, you're worse than useless. Saving throws matter. A lot. That wisdom save jumps from a +1 to a +6 with this feat. So let's compare the two builds. In campaign, Yasha received Bracers of Defense and a Coat of the Crest, which gives a combined +3 to AC. She had a Ring of Protection +1, and for this new build, I'll assume Half Plate +2, which could have been forged or purchased or found without much issue. The AC of this new build is a very solid 21, compared to the campaign version's 18. The CR game uses rolled hit points rather than average, so I'll compare the average hit points of each build instead, so we're comparing apples to apples. The campaign Yasha would have averaged 149 hit points, while this new version averages 164. The one level of fighter actually decreases the hit points by 1, but the +1 to AC does more than enough to offset the difference. That one level in fighter also gives us the opportunity later to sink a few more levels into fighter if we want to get a fighting subclass or action surge, or even 4 levels if we want to get another ASI or feat. Saving throws are much better with the Ring of Protection, increased strength and constitution numbers, and resilient wisdom is through the roof. Campaign Yasha had a +9, +7, and +0 in strength, con, and wisdom saves. This build has a +11, +9, and +7, substantially better. For the remaining saves, Yasha had a +3 dex, +1 intelligence, and -2 charisma save. The new version has a +3, +0, and also a -2 respectively. The only save better on the original build is intelligence by 1 point. Defensively, there is just a massive upgrade with this new version. But how does she fare offensively? With the Holy Avenger, Rage, and Reckless Attack turned on and the Zealot's Divine Fury landing once per round, Campaign Yasha averages 45.1 points of damage per round, or 46.4 with Savage Attacker against an AC 18 enemy. Not bad. The new version of the build, with a higher strength, Great Weapon Master, -5 +10, and possibly extra bonus action attack, the same rage bonus, and a very slightly lower Divine Fury damage, does 60.8 damage. So in addition to having substantially higher defensive capabilities to keep Yasha around longer, both mentally, by not being mind controlled, and physically, by not dying, this version of Yasha does 31% more damage per round. And we're not even counting the additional rounds of damage that being alive will do for the character. And you know what? Not a single one of these changes has any meaningful impact on the Yasha character. And it certainly has no impact on Ashley's ability to roleplay. And you could even argue that if it did have an impact, it would be a positive one, because we've removed much of the complexity of the character by getting rid of the feats, like Savage Attacker, and replacing it with feats and ASIs that give static bonuses that don't need to be remembered.